Hello everyone. I am delighted to announce the Registrar's Civic Engagement Award for 2020. The Civic Engagement Award recognises the work of our colleagues who have made outstanding contributions to colleges' engagement with wider society through their teaching and/or research, securing great benefit to the public good. Highlighting the excellent ongoing projects of our colleagues inspires us all and helps us to see our own work in a social context. Civic engagement is not limited to certain areas of academia. We need to be able to articulate the myriad ways in which we impact our local and global societies. It was great news for us recently that Trinity College ranked 14th in the world in the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings for 2020. This is the third year of the Registrar Civic Engagement Award, and as in previous years, and despite the difficult circumstances for us all at the time that the call went out, we received excellent nominations that each embody how this university is an important contributor to society, where our academic endeavours can have transformative impact in addressing the important challenges of the 21st century. From inspiring and engaging our students to get involved in societal change, to meeting great universal challenges like global health and well-being and environmental damage and climate change. Universities can address both local and global issues, enabling people to make the most of their talents and their lives, as well as generating new knowledge and insight. And that is exactly what this year's inspirational nominees exemplify. The works nominated range from extensive bodies of research of high international standing to the work of individuals working with specific communities. The nominees include the Long Room Hub team for conversations and collaborations with the public, for example, their excellent discussion series Behind the Headlines. Dr. David Fennelly in the Law School, who brings partnerships with legal professionals in the public, private and not-for-profit sectors to his teaching. Dr. Frédéric Valliere, School of Psychology, for international leadership in the area of global mental health, in particular psychotrauma. The work of Michelle Leach and Claire Poole in the School of Medicine, who developed a free online module on radiation therapy that has reached over 4,000 participants across 110 countries. Dr. Ruth Brennan, marine social scientist in the School of History and Humanities. Professor Anna Shahood, Chair of Latin for the project Living Latin. Dr. Joseph Roach, School of Education, and Mairead Hurley, Science Gallery for the Probe project. Miss Noreen O'Shea and the Networking and Educating Students Together project at St. James's Hospital, working with the local community. All nominees for 2020 will be listed on the Civic Engagement website, where shortly, with their permission, their work will be profiled. The great importance of all of these nominations, combined with the huge range of subjects and scale, made the work of the review panel to choose a single awardee particularly difficult. But we did. The Registrar's Civic Engagement Awardee for 2020 is Dr. Rachel Hoare, Department of French in the School of Languages, Literatures and Cultural Studies, for her work in arts psychotherapy assisting minors in asylum. And I am delighted that Rachel is here with me, not in person, but live on screen, and has agreed to tell us about her work. Rachel, congratulations. The review panel were particularly impressed by how your work goes from assisting unaccompanied and separated children to working with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees to deliver training programs to professionals. Can you please say a little about those different levels of the work?
Many thanks, Paula. I'm absolutely delighted to be the recipient of this year's award. So to answer your questions, I'd firstly like to talk a little bit about where this journey began for me. But like many others, I was absolutely horrified by the images of the so-called migrant crisis, which were everywhere in the media in 2015. And I decided at that point that I'd like to use my skills as a child and adolescent expressive arts psychotherapist to help unaccompanied and separated children seeking asylum in Ireland. And I was actually taken on by TUSLA to work with these young people, initially in a voluntary capacity for a couple of evenings a week. And that's work which I'm still doing at the moment. The work has been both challenging and rewarding. And the thing about the expressive arts modality is that it's a really good fit for these young people because they're often unable to verbally express or describe what's happened to them. Yet they do have a need to articulate the unspeakable. The language part of the brain is often shut down after traumatic experiences. And these young people also don't often have very good English, at least at the start. So they're better able to express themselves using miniature figures, art materials and images. I'll never forget the first session with one young person who came in, looked around all the miniatures I have and took a scorpion. He looked up at me and said through the interpreter, "We have these in my country. They're very dangerous, but not as dangerous as the Taliban." From this statement, I was able to very gently explore what had happened to this young person, who continued to engage extremely well using the miniature figures, which I'm still collecting, to cover many aspects of the lives of young people from many different cultures that I'm working with. In fact, early on, I had to invest in many different types of sea vessels and lorries and even camels for when a young person wanted to illustrate their journey. And I also had to get some structures made to represent typical dwellings when they wanted to articulate what life was like back home. And I've just got one of them here that you can see was just a very simple structure that was made, because the houses I had didn't represent anything that the young person was familiar with in their home country. In relation to the UNHCR, which is the UN Refugee Agency, the global organisation dedicated to saving lives and protecting the rights of refugees, I was contacted by the Ireland office on the back of my work for TUSLA to deliver training on the impact of trauma on people who have been forcibly displaced. This took the form of multi-agency training for professionals working in the Border Protection Agency, TUSLA, the Legal Aid Board, the International Protection Office, and the Reception and Integration Agency. I really like to bring the creative into my training, and one of the ways in which I illustrated the impact of trauma in this training was by showing them this mask, which was made by one of the young people I was working with. And basically this shows what the young person was feeling like on the inside. So often we use magazines to cut out words, newspapers, but also just good old Sharpies. And you know, the things that they've put on how they were feeling on the inside are scared, upset, worried, lost, sad and helpless. On the outside, what they represent on the outside is how they think they are perceived by others. And this is a really interesting exercise to do with them, but it's also quite a difficult and challenging one. You'll see some of the things they put on. They're not Irish, prejudice, violence, scary. So this is how they think people perceive them because they are different. So that's I would have to know the young person quite well before I would engage in this kind of exercise, because it really does bring up a lot of difficulties, a lot of difficult feelings for the young person.
And then you use that in the training course, do you, to get that across within the training course?
It's very powerful. I find that very powerful in the training course, and it's a thing that people actually remember, because I suppose the visual is a very strong image there.
Yeah, you can see how powerful that is. And what clearly struck the review panel was the reach of the impact of the work, from working with the individual children to embedding the learning from that in the training programs. And you've just shown us here how that connection can work so powerfully. And you've developed a Trinity elective module called Displacement, Exploring the Human Experience of Forced Migration. And this sharing of the learnings from the work in this module, which is open to all students, embodies research-led and indeed practice-led teaching and learning.
Yeah, and I mean, I do love the fact that the elective is open to students throughout college, because it's really interesting to get different students' perspectives who come from different disciplines. But yeah, it's as well as being research-led, it's very important. The kind of practice-led piece is very, very important. And I mean, the elective itself was inspired by my clinical work, which I've just told you a little bit about with the young refugees and asylum seekers. And my colleagues teaching on the elective also have very practical experience in supporting people who've been forcibly displaced, as well as having excellent research records in this area. So one of my colleagues has actually volunteered at the camps in Calais and Greece. So when the call for the Trinity electives came out in early 2018, Europe was still really struggling with this humanitarian crisis, or so-called refugee crisis, on a scale which was really unprecedented in post-war times. I'm recognising that forced migration really represents one of the key societal challenges of our times. I wanted to use a multidisciplinary approach to provide a theoretical, practical and experiential understanding of the different causes and impacts of forced migration globally, and a real emphasis there on the experiential. I really wanted to bring across, what it's like to experience forced displacement. assessment, and also a comprehensive analysis of historical and contemporary issues in the field. And when I started looking for colleagues to teach on it, I was amazed by the number of colleagues throughout college who are teaching and researching in this area from many different fields. So from law to nursing to human rights to ecumenics, you know, lots of different people. So I really had more than enough colleagues to help to put input into the elective. But it's really brought us all together, along with students as well. And we've been working on several different collaborations. I suppose, as I alluded to a moment ago, the strong emphasis throughout the module on the lived experiences, on the voices of children and adults who have been displaced, as well as those involved in identifying and supporting them, including the UNHCR, as I just mentioned, the Irish Border Agency, and different refugee support agencies such as the Irish Refugee Council. One of the highlights of the module for both staff and students was a panel discussion whose participants included a person currently living in direct provision, a representative from the UNHCR, and a young woman who'd spent her whole childhood in a refugee camp in Thailand. And actually Zoom very much facilitated this panel discussion because we had people from all over the world at it. And what we found, one of the ways of assessing the module was reflective essays, and the student essays that they submitted on the experience of preparing for and being part of the interviews demonstrated deep reflective learning. And in some cases, you know, students described it as life-changing.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Yeah. You use many different avenues and opportunities to share the learnings and communicate the importance of the work, from academic publications and conferences to working with colleagues on creative arts projects. Can you say something about the value of using that variety of media?
Yeah, I love using a variety of different media in my therapy work, so it really seems only fitting that this should be mirrored in the ways in which I share that learning and communicate the importance of my work. It's also reflected in qualitative creative methods, which I use to explore lived experiences in my research with young asylum seekers. So it's a kind of crossover between teaching, clinical practice and research. To bring to life the experiences of those seeking asylum, I use illustrative examples in my teaching and training, which evoke smell, touch, taste, sound and sight. All types of memories, including those which are fragmented and dysfunctional and associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, are formed through sensory stimuli. So it's the senses, it's the smell that you remember, or the touch or the feel of something. I had a young man into me recently who that was obviously before lockdown, there was lots of sunshine coming in through the window, and he came in and he really looked taken aback, and he said, that's just like the sunflowers that I saw when I was leaving Syria. He said, it just reminds me of a feel. It was just the way the light was. So that's how the memories are really brought out, all of these sensory stimuli. So all types of memories, including those which are fragmented and dysfunctional and associated with post-traumatic stress disorder, are formed through sensory stimuli. And I like to bring that out in my teaching and training. For example, the strong visual nature of the mask I showed you earlier to illustrate feelings is always experienced as being very powerful and memorable in my training groups. These creative avenues of expression are well illustrated in the following piece of art, which I have permission to share with you. Which was produced by one of the young people I'm working with. So you can see in the picture there, if we start on the left hand section, that he's basically been documenting his journey from Eritrea to Ireland, and you can see there he's put a little kind of block of darkness as well up in the top left hand corner of the flag, and that dark, these are his words to me, that for him that represents war. Eritrea is his home country. There's a necklace there which is precious to him as well, and then he moves into Ethiopia, which is a little bit more hopeful by the little green block there, which represents hope and growth, but there's also black kind of intermingled there in the colour to represent difficulties and troubles as well. Then he moves on to Sudan, and you can see there there's a little picture on the right hand side of sand and of footprints in the sand representing part of his journey as well. The colour is red at the bottom of that flag, representing death and people lost. And then Libya, which is possibly the most disturbing part of this piece of art, because there are scars and cuts. The colour's very dark in the kind of section at the top of the flag, representing crisis, a very dangerous place. Where torture happened, no freedom, no chance. And you can see there that he's included actually a picture of one of his friend's hands who was tortured and had, as you can see there, parts of his fingers removed. And the position, the picture of the person sitting there in huge distress, the young person took a long time choosing that image, and he felt that really illustrated where he was at that point. So then on the next, on the right hand page, we've got he was then his journey took him then to Italy. And on the left of that picture, it's quite hard to see actually on the slide, but there is the dove, so representing freedom, green representing hope, you know, good change. Then he moves on to Switzerland, and it's actually quite difficult to see the image that it's very faint, but it's actually of an ambulance, because, you know, I suppose when we see the white cross of the Swiss flag, we also think of, you know, of health services and ambulances. So again, for him, that represented hope. And one interesting thing that came up in much research that was done after 9/11 was done of children's art that they did after 9/11, and what the art showed is that when the young children had some kind of helping adult or helping organization in the picture, that there's some very interesting images, very powerful images of the Twin Towers and of people jumping out of buildings and landing and landing whenever they landed on something, like, you know, some children were drawing trampolines, and you know, that there was hope, or there was an ambulance on standby, or there was somebody catching them. Those children tended to have a quicker recovery and better overall outcomes. So it's fascinating how art can really, you know, tell us a huge amount about recovery as well. And then we move on to France, which there's the kind of green colour in the background, which might not be as visible to you, but and then black for challenges as well. This young person was in the jungle in Calais, but also a trophy there, which again is quite difficult to make out, but that's a trophy for boxing. So there was a boxing competition in the camp, and this young person was extremely proud that he'd won this trophy. And then at the very end, we've got Ireland, which is, you know, this good place, a new home, and a new future. So I just thought that was a very powerful way to kind of end this conversation, really. And I really would like to dedicate this award to all of the very inspiring young people whom I've had the great privilege to work with, and to thank them for allowing me also to share their thoughts and their art as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And the word indentation down the visual as well, very, very, very striking.
Yeah, and again, that was a word that young man chose, and if you think about it, he had very little English when he arrived here, so to come up with a word like that, it was very powerful. Thank you.
So thank you very much for speaking to us today, Rachel, and giving us great insight. And we can see from this how you use your practice to enhance the understanding of so many. And so my warmest congratulations and best wishes for the ongoing work.
Many thanks, Paula. Thank you.